Hi, my name is Shari Mahale, and I'm currently on the first Broadway National Tour of the show Life of Pi. I have a pretty awful memory, and so I thought I would start creating these little diary entries to document my process and just watch my emotional and artistic growth throughout the next couple of months on tour. I play Pi's sister Rani, and I also understudy Pi. This video is about our 5 weeks of rehearsal process and what it was like learning the show from scratch. For context, if you're not familiar with Life of Pi is a book that was published in 2001 by the author Jan Martel. It was then created into an Oscar-winning movie directed by Ang Lee, and more recently in 2023 it debuted on Broadway. The story is about a 16-year-old boy who survives a shipwreck in the middle of the Pacific Ocean against all odds. It brings up a lot of interesting philosophical questions and challenges the audience to really think about their belief system. I'm really grateful that this is the show and this is the story that I get to bring across the US because I really stand by it when I say this story really is transformative. I hear it from audiences all the time that this book or this story changed the way they thought about life, or it was a pivotal part of their coming of age. So, a little bit more about the rehearsal process. The 5 weeks of rehearsal went by like this. So the first week we were really focusing on shifting our mindset and training our peripheral senses. We started off the rehearsal process with exercises to heighten our spatial awareness and help us understand the basics of puppetry. So if you're familiar with the book or the movie Life of Pi, then you know that there's a lot of animals in the show. And the way that we show animals in the show is through puppets. But these puppets are probably different than like maybe the traditional sock puppets or something that you might be thinking of when you hear the word puppet. These puppets are operated by 2 or 3 people at a time and require an insane amount of agility, teamwork, and just dexterity and physical ability. These were long and grueling days, especially for the puppeteers, because they were on their feet and physically lifting puppets and jumping and diving, and there were a lot of physical demands of them day in and day out for the 5 weeks of rehearsal, but they had such tenacity and grit. I have a lot of respect for them, and I learned so much about work ethic from them. We also jump-started the process with upping everyone's fitness game. Even when I auditioned for this process, they were testing our physical stamina. I think it was our second round of callbacks. We were there in person and we were doing push-ups and endurance things, and they were really testing our physical ability to make sure that we could keep up with the demands of the show. So every morning we had warm-ups to build our stamina and endurance to make sure we were getting in the habit of taking care of our bodies so that we could adequately perform all of the rigorous lifts required without fatiguing. This was actually one of the main reasons that I did 75 hard over the summer, was to make sure that I was in the right physical shape to be able to take on a role like this. Then we went scene by scene, dissecting and staging everything. Because this is a show that's been done before, there were several things that were already set in stone that were non-negotiable. But there were certain things that the creatives were open to negotiating a little bit based off of what the actors brought into the room, so long as it was in service of the play. We would start working on a scene just by reading it sitting down. Then we'd start working it on its feet and trying out different things. Little by little, our director Ashley helped us craft the best version of it. And then we'd practice that until we got into the right visual and creative flow. Once the scene had found its legs with just the text and the props, we started adding in the puppetry elements. And then we'd begin crafting the full picture. This was always the coolest part. By the end of the second week, we had finished stitching together the entire first act, so we did a stumble through of Act 1. Week 3, we were working on the second half, and by week 4, we were ready to do a stumble through of the entire play. Then we spent the last week of rehearsals just fine-tuning everything and making sure we were ready to go into tech in Baltimore the following week. The second act has a lot more puppetry, especially with the tiger. It was always so cool watching our movement and puppetry director, Scarlett, work with Ashley, our director, find the most compelling version of the scene. As quickly as those 5 weeks did fly by, I really do think by the end of week 5, we felt ready to bring this into tech rehearsals. My 3 biggest takeaways from rehearsals were definitely the importance of being word perfect. As someone who typically memorizes lines in concepts or chunks of intention, this really forced me to think a lot more about detail because entire teams and departments were depending on me being word perfect for literal safety purposes. For example, we have a lot of automation and sound effects and visual cues that are dependent on text as their cues, right? So if the stage manager was listening for the line, "I smell fresh water," and I said the scent of fresh water, they might not catch that as a cue, which then turns into a safety issue. If somebody else misses their cue, it could steamroll into a much greater issue, basically. And I think it was a particularly challenging muscle to build because in film, television, and commercial acting, I've always been encouraged, or if not rewarded, for improvising or putting my own spin on things or making the words sound like my own. And especially since this show has already gone through several iterations, they already know the words that they want to hear on stage, and so there's no room for improvising anything. The second most important thing I learned was managing peripheral awareness. Physically managing space between multiple puppeteers, puppets, and props is really important for safety. And lastly, the importance of script analysis. I can just hear all my teachers from acting classes I've taken telling me the importance of it, but I feel like I really understood it from this experience. Because the scripts has a lot of time lapses and memory jumps and retellings, the words hold a lot of cues in themselves. Being acutely aware of verb tenses has been super helpful in helping the memorization process go smoother, and even understanding the deeper implications of the story. All right, that's a wrap on rehearsal recap for Life of Pi in New York City. On to Tech Week in Baltimore we go.